This episode contains material that might be triggering for some. If you need to stop the podcast at any time to take care of yourself, please do so.
If you need support, you can call the 24/7 National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. Dialectical behavior therapy was created in the 1980s by Marsha Linehan in Seattle, Washington.
Today, DBT is taught all over the world.
We're two therapists who believe everyone can benefit from DBT skills.
I'm Kate.
I'm Michelle.
And this is DBT and Me.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Welcome.
Oh.
Hello.
See,
Oh,
we
sorry.
just can't get
I did
our
give you an
hellos
opening,
the right
Kate.
time. I was slow last time. I'm too fast this time.
That was not you. That was me just being all ready to say, it's Q&A number 17. Which
True.
is pretty crazy. Yeah.
It's pretty crazy.
All right. So you get to start off with the first one. It seems like for whatever reason, this is totally not intentional, but that the first ones tend to be the longest ones. And that is the case today too. So yeah, you get to start, Kate.
Okay, here we go. This reads, Dear Kate and Michelle, I am a fairly new listener to the podcast. I began listening to you guys because I have little time to read/work on the DBT workbook my therapist had recommended to me. I'm a full-time nursing student and part-time CNA. When I did have time to do the workbook, it seemed like every time I finished a section, there was a new sheet to fill out. Not just once, but every day for the next this many weeks. I've gotten through about a fourth of the book and technically have 23 different worksheets/logs to do every day. I became very overwhelmed, but still wanted to keep learning and practicing DBT, and that's where you guys come in. I now have your workbook, which is straightforward and simple, but effective. So what's my issue here? I tend to listen to multiple episodes in a week or day, depending on my schedule, and work in the workbook when I can. As a result, I'm having trouble memorizing all of the skills/acronyms and forgetting to practice them daily. I've downloaded a couple of DBT apps, but they're mostly just diary cards and not practice tools. I've seen DBT flashcards, games, quizzes, etc., but honestly, I'm overwhelmed all over again. Should I continue with the original workbook I had started? Am I missing out if I don't? Is it okay to cram multiple episodes into my week to fit my schedule? Should I be doing a diary card every day? How can I remember to practice all these skills daily? Is there something I should be doing each day to practice, i.e. worksheets, flashcards, meditation? Thank you for taking the time to read my long and hectic email.
Yeah. Before I guess answer the listeners' questions here, we hear this a lot.
Yes.
because DBT contains so many skills and there are so many resources out there and so many worksheets. A lot of people get overwhelmed by this. It's not an uncommon experience, and we've actually considered, and maybe we've talked about maybe doing a monthly episode all about kind of how to actually make sure you're practicing DBT but having it be manageable and not overwhelming.
Not 23
worksheets and logs. Yeah. It's a lot. So I mean, the reason why there is so much out there about DBT is because DBT wants to make sure that you have the resources you need for the skills that you're wanting to practice. And different people practice things in different ways. Some people really like fill-in-the-blank worksheets. Some people really like daily logs and diary cards, but you don't have to do it all. You get to pick and choose what fits for you, is the long and short of it. So really, the thing that I come back to time and time again is that even though practicing skills is important, I say this the first night of every group that Kate and I teach, you can show up to group, you can be as attentive as you want to be, And you will not get as much out of this experience as you could if you don't go out and practice, right? It's super important to practice the skills, but how you practice is important. And it really does become about quality over quantity with DBT skills. So there's lots of different recommendations. And, you know, Kate's going to share kind of what her thoughts are and what she recommends. But I mean, listener, it ultimately comes down to whatever fits for you. But what I tend to recommend as a general rule of thumb, focus on one skill a week. There's a reason why we put out episodes once a week. And even then, this can feel very fast and very quick. So if there's a skill, especially the acronyms that have lots of different components, you might need to spend 2 weeks or more on those, because there's all these different pieces of it. Whereas like willing hands, it's a pretty simple one to understand. So not all of the skills are created equal, and some skills really might be more challenging for you. Some skills might come more naturally to you. But generally, 1 skill per week is plenty. That's a lot. That's a lot to learn. And so since you have this workbook, and you said you have the workbook that we've created too. So, I mean, whichever workbook works for you. Oh, man.
Tongue twister,
right? But like, let's say the skill that you're picking that week is check the facts. You know, you can listen to the podcast episode on that. You can do or read the part of the workbook on that. But then don't add on anything else. Just focus on check the facts for the next week. Try to notice how you might be using that in your life and that kind of a thing without adding on any new skills or any new information. That's enough. And in general, once you have kind of worked through most of the DBT skills, which if I'm being perfectly honest, takes about a year, I would say, honestly, to have worked on all of them. If you're working on them at the pace of 1 skill per week, it could take about a year. So once you kind of have a working knowledge, like if I say please and you know what I'm talking about, and if I say, you know, willingness and you know what I'm talking about, and if I say radical acceptance and you know what I'm talking about, and dear man, like you have this working knowledge. Once you kind of have all of that under your belt, then what I recommend moving forward after you've kind of learned about all of them is to pick 1 or 2 as, I say, like a theme for your week. So whatever you see coming up in your life for that week, think about what 1 or 2 skills may really benefit you that week. Now, life is unpredictable. We don't always know what's going to come our way. Things change. But that can be really helpful if it's like, hey, I'm wanting to, we always come back to dishes and driving. My partner hasn't been doing the dishes very often, and that's been on my mind, and I want to talk with him about that. Okay, dear man is going to be one of your skills that week. If you catch yourself having an attitude of willfulness, okay, willingness is going to be my skill this week. If you are really struggling with self-harm, okay, pros and cons is going to be my skill this week. Or like whatever it might be, pick 1 or 2 to really dive into and focus on. And if you're having weeks where you're like, well, this is a pretty average week, I'm not really sure. Mindfulness is a good fallback. Mindfulness, wise mind, those are like the backbone skills of DBT. So if nothing else, because you did ask at one point, you said something, is there something I should be doing each day to practice, i.e. worksheets, flashcards, meditation? If I had to pick one of those, meditation, aka some kind of mindfulness, even if it's not looking like a formal meditation, is what I would recommend, if nothing else. But no, you do not have to be using all 40 plus DBT skills every day of your life.
Whoa.
Not realistic. So make it doable, make it manageable. I mean, you sound like a very, very busy person. And if there's a week where it's just kind of like, hey, I wasn't able to listen to a podcast episode this week, I wasn't able to learn a new skill this week, that's okay. Just keep working on the last skill you learned, because it takes us more than a week to master a skill. Some of these skills take practicing for months or longer before we feel like we actually are getting them down. So take as much time with a skill as you need before you move on to the next one, so that you feel like you actually have a handle on it, is really what I would recommend.
I like it. It's funny because when I was reading this message, listener, I literally exclaimed out loud, sweet Jeebus, no one does all the skills every day. So I think I could start with that, because sweet Jeebus, nobody does all the skills every day. In part because, dear goodness, I hope you don't have a life that could even possibly require all of the skills every day.
Yeah, you don't need them all every day.
No, bad no. Do not know. So very similarly to what Michelle was saying, I say pick a skill a day or a week, right? Until you feel comfortable before moving on. That being said, I get wanting to listen to something or wanting to do stuff when you can fit it in. If you end up listening to multiple episodes, that's fine. I don't think there's any reason not to listen when you can listen. Just don't hold over yourself the idea that if you've listened to an episode on a skill, all right, now you have to start practicing it. It does not have to be that way, right? Michelle, I like how you were talking about getting sort of a working knowledge. If you listen to the episodes, you'll probably more or less recognize most of the skills by name, at least when you're done. And so that can just be, the way you get that sort of background knowledge going. And when a skill comes up as being the skill you want to focus on for that day or week, maybe re-listen to the episode on it, if that seems accessible, if that feels good. But yeah, I think it's fine to listen to the episodes whenever you have the opportunity, so long as you're not pressuring yourself to try and put it into immediate action, because you can't. No. Do not do. And sometimes repeat exposure is helpful anyway. Michelle and I joke rather regularly that we had prior exposure to DBT, both of us, before we started teaching together. And both of us have been teaching DBT together for 5-ish years, and doing the podcast. And we still have to sit there and be like, all right, what are all the letters? What do those all stand for, right? With the acronyms, or I will own this. Michelle's much better at this. I consistently fuck up whether a skill is a distress tolerance skill or an emotion regulation skill.
I knew you were going to say that.
I can't keep them straight. I know what the skills are, just if you made me tell you which module it was in. Between those two, I would not get them all right. I'd get some of them right. I would not get all of them right. And I teach this shit. So that's a real long way of saying be kind to yourself. If you're having a hard time remembering all of these, that's okay. That's pretty normal. It's pretty understandable, acceptable, right? So deep breath, be kind to yourself. And as Michelle said as well, if you're going to do anything daily, I'm always going to plug some form of mindfulness as being the thing you do, because that helps everything else, right? There's not wise mind and mindfulness help you get all of the other skills integrated, helps you remember them, helps you. Yeah, I just find them as, you used a great word. Did you say you found?
I think I said backbone.
Backbone, yeah, there you go. Backbone, foundation, right? Like these are the skills that most of the rest of DBT is sitting on, right? They need that to get anywhere. So yeah, if you're gonna do something daily, then pick mindfulness, but don't try to do them all every day. Cannot do. Bad idea. I hope somewhere between us that answers your question. Just take your time. It's okay. Not a rush.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. It's a marathon, not a sprint. That's how people burn out on DBT. That's why some people go through DBT, they're like, I hated it, because it got really overwhelming. So don't overwhelm yourself. It's okay.
Your turn.
Yeah, so the next one, all of them for the remainder of the episode are really short and sweet. A couple sentences. So this next one just says, I have a friend with her husband in the ICU due to COVID. Any skills I can talk to her through? Or talk her through, I think is probably how they mean it. Any skills I can give her, I think is what's implied here.
It took me a second, then I realized you actually did read that the way it's written.
Yeah, I didn't realize until after reading it. I was like, wait a second.
Talk her through. Yeah,
but I think that's what is meant.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, first of all, I'm so sorry to your friend. That's so hard. I am enormously lucky that I have not had anybody in my immediate life get hospitalized from COVID, but I did go through a time when I was much younger where my mom was in the ICU for 6-ish weeks, and I know how hard that can be. So my heart goes out to your friend. And then I'm actually gonna say this in reverse order of what I have in my notes. Really damn near anything in distress tolerance, right? Like that's her situation is the kind of situation that module is for. Right?
Yep.
Like, that is for, hey, there's a nasty thing going on over which you have zero control. Go. Right? So, almost any of them. Probably in reverse order of easiness. The 3 skills I thought of specifically were radical acceptance, improve, and self-soothe. Yeah. I don't know. It's so funny, Michelle. Sometimes my brain just goes straight out of my ears. I don't know. I just feel a lot of empathy for that person. And I don't know. I would say self-soothe is my favorite of the distress tolerance skills, just because it's really accessible, right? You don't even necessarily have to. I mean, it's great if you have some sort of kit or things to bring with you, but most of the time you can find something to do, right? Going and getting a cup of coffee, hot cocoa, tea, whatever, right, can be a self-soothing thing. And one thing hospitals do have, at least, is on average hot beverages, right? Like, or cuddling with a blanket, or wearing comfy clothing when she goes to visit in the hospital if she can. I don't know. Different hospitals are having different regulations right now. So, and then, other things for distraction, like stuff in improve. I think Michelle's going to mention a couple other things there, maybe. And radical acceptance is the one that's hardest, but also most true, right? Her husband is there. That is, right? And so if she's still fighting with that, if she's still trying to deny that, if she is still, not really grounded in the reality of that, actually getting there, actually using radical acceptance can be surprisingly, I don't know what the right word is. It doesn't make the situation better. Like, nothing makes it better to have a loved one in the ICU. But it just takes an edge off of the suffering. It's still really hard. It's still really scary. It's still exhausting. It's still terrifying. Like, all of that shit's still going to be there. But at least if you're not fighting with it, you're not adding yourself to the list of hardships, right? You're not part of why it is hard for you anymore. If you can at least, Jesus, not at least, but if you can, do radical acceptance. So those are my thoughts. What about you, Michelle?
Yeah. With what you said about the distraction piece, I think that actually applies to the next question.
You're totally right.
Okay. I know, everything's so close together this time with our notes.
Yeah, they are tiny. I need to highlight or bold things.
That's true. This is for this question. This is for that one.
Fair enough. Then throw accept in there too with improve.
Right. But I mean, I guess kind of building off of the radical acceptance piece that you were just talking about, Kate, like, I don't know what that might look like here is, because I'll speak for myself. I have a tendency to just try to keep going at all costs. No matter how bad something is that's going on in life, or no matter how bad I'm feeling, with like my own physical health or mental health or whatever it is.
You don't
I
do
just
collapse well.
I don't do slowing down well. I just go. It's what willfulness looks like for me. And I don't know how your friend is adjusting to this, but if she reaches a place of radical acceptance, that might be something like, hey, okay, so he's in the ICU and these medical bills are starting to come in, and, you know, maybe rather than thinking like, I've got it, we're good, you know, maybe I do need to create like a GoFundMe or reach out to some close friends and family members, or maybe I need to adjust my work hours, or maybe I need to, you know, radical acceptance a lot of times looks like course correcting.
Or like giving yourself permission.
Yeah, giving yourself permission to do something different because this big thing is happening. So maybe that's what it could look like for your friend, is just how is she course correcting because of this thing? Or is she doing what I personally have a tendency to do, which is just keep going as if nothing was ever happening, which doesn't tend to work. So anyways, that's a little add-on to radical acceptance. But what I have in my notes is that I first of all second exactly what Kate said about using distress tolerance. Those are the skills. That's what is really needed here, is anything in that realm. But the only other additional skill I will add on is using please from emotion regulation.
Mm-hmm.
So really making sure that she is taking care of her physical well-being. Generally speaking, especially when you have somebody that you love who is in a lot of distress, and yeah, in the hospital or something like that, as the loved one, your self-care can sometimes go out the window. Next thing you know, you haven't showered for 3 days and you're probably not sleeping very well. And oh yeah, food, you don't remember the last time you ate. And all of that physical self-care stuff can really just be put on the back burner. And so I would recommend that too, because if she is practicing please, that will help her then better be able to make decisions and choices about what needs to happen during this time, and that will just help her better take care of her mental health when she's taking care of her physical health. So please also feels really important here too.
I like it. Yeah. My turn.
Okay, your turn. Yes.
All right. I'm like making sure I'm in the right place on the page. All right. This says, hello, my 14-year-old daughter returns home from an inpatient psychiatric stay this Wednesday. She's having a hard time with suicidal ideation and specifically intrusive thoughts. Any suggestions for specific DBT exercises that may help with that?
Yeah. I mean, so in large part, DBT really was designed for people experiencing suicidal thinking, or people who were self-harming, or which don't always go together. Sometimes there's overlap there, sometimes there's not, but DBT was kind of designed for this. So, I mean, I think a lot of this is gonna just be personal. What might work for one person may not work for another. But this is where I made some notes about distraction, because I think accepts can be a helpful skill here. Because suicidal thoughts can be very all-consuming. And what accepts does is it gives you things to do, right? Like the contributing, that's an action. Or like the activities, that's an action. Or sensations, that's an action. You know, some of the letters in the acronym are very action-based. So it gives you something to do to help hopefully get you outside of your head, and focusing on something else instead. So I think some stuff from accepts might be really helpful. And again, distraction, we talk about this, I believe, in the episode about accepts, or sometimes we say this in groups, but this is all about effective distraction. If you just sit and scroll through your phone on social media, that's not effective distraction.
Not effective, not deliberate either. I think that's another way.
Yeah, exactly.
It.
That's mindless. If you're just sitting there zoning out to the TV for hours, that's not effective distraction. So we can all be prone to these things sometimes, but when it comes to, you know, really wanting to fully immerse yourself in an experience that's going to be distracting, accepts is where you want to go to maybe get your mind on something else. The other thing that I think can be helpful, not so much as like, oh, here the suicidal thoughts come, how do we intervene when they're already there? But this can just be something to do as a base, regardless of whether it's a day where she's feeling really suicidal or less so, is just having a daily mindfulness practice of some kind. That can be really, really grounding. Right? This can look like formal meditation. And it can also look, again, like an action. This could look like her going for a mindful walk. This could look like her doing something first thing when she wakes up in the morning, you know. I'm just going to look around my room and kind of name, you know, a couple colors that I see, and I'm going to take a couple breaths before I get out of bed. Whatever it is, it could look so many different ways. But having some kind of mindfulness practice as an anchor, if you think of it like an anchor in a boat, right? Boats can really drift in all directions, but they can only go so far when they're attached to an anchor that's grounding them. And so hopefully, even if she's having days where she's really struggling, that may be something for her to lean on and be something that she could depend on, is having some kind of a daily mindfulness practice, even on her hardest days. So that's what I suggest. And Kate has some lovely suggestions too. So what are your thoughts, Kate?
It's so funny. I don't know what was going on with me when I was writing the notes this time. I'm normally much more narrative, but a good portion of my notes today seem to just be a list of skills rather than being more emotive or narrative. So I think that's a little bit funny. So the more narrative bit is, I'm so sorry. Being, you know, the parent of a child that's been in inpatient psychiatric care, that's really hard. Don't forget to take care of yourself, listener.
Yeah.
You're a better resource the more well taken care of you are, right? So don't forget yourself in this equation. Also, it's good modeling, right? So I know you didn't ask about that at all, so I maybe am apologizing for the unsolicited advice and still giving it anyway. Remember to take care of yourself too. As for as for skills for your daughter, I was trying to think, what are some of the things that have helped me the most when I've been in those kind of spots with pretty significant suicidal ideation or kind of intrusive thinking about self-harm or suicidal ideation? And these are in no particular order, because I think Michelle spoke to this a little bit. It's going to be individual, right? Your daughter is going to have different things that feel more accessible and more helpful. And they might be different than mine. But pros and cons is a lovely one. I think I've said this a few times, and I'll probably end up saying it a few more. I like how DBT does pros and cons because it allows you the space for why you want to do the thing, right? Like, what are the pros of self-harming? What are the pros of suicide? Which so many people are so gun shy of talking about that.
It's very taboo.
Yes, it's very taboo to be like, all right, what are your reasons for wanting to die? Let's look at that. Like, what would you get out of it, right? And so even if it's in a conversation just with herself, like doing it with that, it's a weird thing, because validating is just slightly off from what I'm trying to get across. Michelle, if you think of a word, blurt it out. But it's just so nice to not have to ignore that. And so many things.
Like empathy? Almost?
Maybe,
a little bit. Empathizing with that part that wants to die. That's how, like, with the focusing trainings I've done, that's kind of how they conceptualize it. Like, there's something in you that feels suicidal and wants to die. There's probably also something in you that might want to live.
Yep.
But how do we let each of those parts have a voice? How
yes.
do we hear
gives
both
a
of them
voice.
and
Yes.
empathize with both of them? And
whereas a lot of people don't want to hear the suicidal person talk about those things, right? So it can be something that gets very shut down because they're like, well, if you're talking about that, then you're more likely to do it. And it's not actually true for the most part. Like, it just feels so nice to have a space where you're not shut down, where it's not taboo, where it's not vilified, where it's not shamed, where it's not... So, anyway, for such a super simple seeming skill, Pros and Cons has a surprising amount to offer emotionally, I would say, when you're in struggling with some of those darker kind of places. Also, self-soothe. We are physical creatures. We just are. And so when we're being really nice to our bodies, that can also help a lot, right? So that's one of my favorites. Improve. Michelle said accepts and improve. Both of them are different forms of distracting / meaning making kind of stuff. But I think they both have individual offerings that are unique and may speak more to your kid. So, if she wants to look those over and see which ones seem to fit the best. Michelle was talking to me beforehand that saying with accept, she stole one of my ideas, but it's just because it's my favorite thing for the T in accepts, which is thoughts. And that is listing 4-letter L words. It sounds weird and simple, but I swear to you, it works. Just have her start listing as many 4-letter L words as she can. She will not list them all. There's almost 400, I want to say. I looked it up once because I was curious. And I'm not sure that when I looked that up, it counted pluralizing 3-letter words. So I don't know. There might be even more. I'm sorry. I dove into that one a little wholeheartedly. Anyway, it's very distracting, right? So especially for the intrusive thoughts part that you mentioned, it can sometimes be really hard to be distracted enough for those thoughts can't penetrate. And so really anything that's really into the thoughts part of accepts, I find to be very helpful in that regard. My favorite is listing out 4-letter L words. It's hard to be thinking about anything else when you're trying to do that. My other suggestion is when you need to pull out this cure is only slightly better than the disease. One is to try counting backwards from 1,000 by increasing prime numbers. It's hard. She probably won't be thinking about suicide when trying to do it. It's not a lot of room in your brain for most people when they're doing that. And then last but certainly not least would be ride the wave, right? Maybe this isn't the case for your daughter, but I'll speak for myself personally. For all of the years of my life that I spent suicidal, it was rarely an equally constant urge at all times, right? It did wax and wane at different times during the day or when triggered by different events or things that people would say, right? It wasn't just one, a flat amount of intensity at all times. It definitely came and went, and Ride the Wave was especially helpful for when it showed up the more intensely, to remind myself that it would pass and subside again later. So yeah, pros and cons: self-soothe, improve, ride the wave. 4-letter L words. There we go. Would be the things that I would recommend. And again, I'm sorry. I know what it's like to, be her. So lots of empathy there.
Yeah. Thank you. Last
You're welcome.
one. Here we go. Okay. I was just wondering, what tips do you have to quiet the internal monologue? It's not a negative monologue. It's just things that keep replaying over and over and over, and it's quite tiring.
First off, my mind was blown. So here we go. Maybe I'm blowing a bunch of minds right now. Do you know, Michelle, there are people with no internal monologue?
I have heard that, and
I cannot conceive.
baffling to me. But then again, I mean, I don't think I've ever said this to you, Kate, but it's baffling to me that you can't see images.
I know. No,
So,
yeah, I get it.
you know.
So anyway, sorry, listener. I remember reading a whole discussion about this one point where basically people on both sides of the issue were like, I'm sorry, what? You have a running narrative in your brain? Like, that's your own voice talking to you? What the fuck? And other people going, I'm sorry, you don't have an internal monologue going at all times? Are you even human? So there's apparently more variety around the presence of internal monologues than I used to think. So anyway, weird bit of trivia for you there. But actual answer to your question is, all right, bear with me. I don't know. Because it's going to be unique to you. So my best technique overarchingly for trying to push the internal monologue to the side for a while is to find something that essentially replaces it. So for me personally, music I can sing along with is wonderful, right? It just replaces it. I don't have an internal monologue. I have a song. And so like loud music, especially, and music I can sing along with, that is very helpful for me in that regard. Also reading. If I'm really into a book, I don't, it's a weird way of putting it, but I don't have my own thoughts while I'm reading. I'm just taking in the reading. And so my internal monologue is quieted or pushed to the side or however you want to think about it. So my answer to your question is a question, which is normally really annoying. I'm hoping it's not, but that's what absorbs you the most, right? What do you disappear into, right? Books, music, video games, nature walks, solving puzzles, like Michelle, I know that's a thing. Cultivating houseplants.
That's a thing for you.
It is. All right. So just what absorbs you? I don't know. I'm have a narrow list of hobbies. I'm like woodworking. What do other people do? 3D. Graphical design, drawing. I don't know.
For some people, it is some kind of physical activity.
Oh yes, my sister does that. Crazy woman.
Yeah, so. Or like if you're, I don't know, if you play a sport, that could be really all consuming. Or
working on
or
your
if there's
technique.
something that you really like watching. Like I know for my husband, he's super into movies, so that's probably gonna quiet his internal monologue. Because like you with books and me with books, he's drawn in.
Yep.
Right?
Exactly. Right. So yeah, I think the best answer I have is for you to answer the question, what absorbs you the most? And then dive headlong into that when you need a little quiet, a little rest from your own thoughts. What about you, Michelle?
Yeah, I kind of had a couple different ways of thinking about this. And hopefully, you know, either some of what you just said, which I really like, will be helpful, or one of the two things that I'm going to say will be helpful. I guess it just kind of depends on what you're looking for when it comes to quieting the internal monologue or shifting it. Because kind of the part that I honed in on here is the part of it's just things keep replaying over and over and over. So we don't know what those things are, what those specific thoughts are for you, listener. But one thought that I had is that if it is anxiety, i.e. if it's thinking about the future and you're struggling to get your brain back to the present, if it's just kind of like, I don't know, this is a super cliche example, but let's say you have a job interview coming up and you just can't stop thinking about your job interview. And that's kind of what your internal monologue is really focusing on. If it's future-focused thoughts, cope ahead, the C part of ABC, might be helpful. Because, you know, what can happen a lot of times with anxiety, I actually don't think I've really conceptualized it this way until just now. But, right, a lot of times anxiety is about something that has yet to happen. So it's kind of like you're trying to almost write this story in your head, but you can't get to the ending because you don't know what it is yet. You don't know how things are actually going to go. So you just write up until a certain point and then you can't finish it. And your brain is trying to, but you don't actually know how it's going to end. And cope ahead can help with that a little bit because you get to think about, well, how might it realistically play out? Especially if you tend to catastrophize and think of the worst case scenario. Well, what is the worst case scenario? And if that happens, how am I going to cope with it? Then what? Then what will I do if that worst case scenario plays out? So cope ahead can sometimes really help in calming anxiety if that's the flavor of your internal monologue. The other thing that I was thinking of, which I don't know if this is what you're looking for at all, or if this is helpful at all. Because in a way, I feel like what I'm about to suggest actually encourages you to focus on the internal monologue, but it might change it. So again, it's that idea of I'm replaying over and over and over. This might help with that, and it might help interrupting that. I said this to a client the other day. She actually really liked it. I didn't know if she would like the suggestion, but she did. Is basically the describe part of mindfulness. Turn that up to level 10. So what are you doing in that moment, right? If I'm sitting here podcasting with you guys, I can say the balls of my feet are resting on the floor. I have my hands in my pocket. I am feeling warmth under my sweater. I see Kate on my computer screen. Just start describing what is happening around you. So is that focusing on your internal monologue? Yes. And also it might change the pace of it, or it might change what it's about because you are making it very present focused. So that might help it get off the track that it's normally on if you switch to describing what's going on for you presently. And you can do that for as long or as little as you like. It actually takes a fair amount of energy to do that, especially in a true mindfulness way, right? Which is being non-judgmental with how you're describing things. So it may take a fair amount of energy, and it also may really help reorient you to the here and now. And so whatever your internal monologue might be about, especially if it might be a past-focused internal monologue, mistakes you've made, something that happened to you years ago, and that's what it's kind of focused on, this will get you out of that. So something else to try.
I like it.
A few things to pick from there, depending on what you feel your needs are. Yeah.
And if none of those answer your questions, please feel free to write us back and be like, no.
Yeah. And I think this person posted in the Facebook group. This was quite a while ago when this question was posted, but I do think some other people responded. So
good.
Hopefully there were some helpful suggestions there too from other listeners.
But the writing us goes for all of you. So we love doing the Q&As. We've got a few already teed up, I think, in the wings, waiting to get recorded. But we want to keep adding more. So please feel free to reach out to us. Our email address is dbtmepodcast@gmail.com. We love to hear from you with your questions, comments, concerns, or compliments. I can keep going with the C words. That makes me happy. Alliteration for the win. We'll continue putting this out there, and join the Facebook group and comment there, because we pull a lot of our material from there as well. So yeah. Thanks so much, everybody, and we'll see you soonish for Q&A number 18.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
To learn more about us and the DBT skills we're teaching each week, join our Facebook group. Simply log in to your Facebook profile and search for DBT